Howie Roseman continued to add pass rushers on Monday, signing Azeez Ojulari, but it should not stop the Eagles from drafting pass rushers in the 2025 NFL Draft. Mock Draft Monday coming your way right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Louie DiBiase. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. As we do every Monday, we're going to go through a 7-round Philadelphia Eagles mock draft, this time post-free agency. I don't want to say post-free agency because it continues, and the Eagles literally just made a signing 5 minutes before I hit record. But now that the first wave is done, we know the Eagles are going to be without Josh Sweat this year, and Milton Williams, and Darius Slay, and now Chauncey Gardner-Johnson as well, who is an unexpected trade. We know that Mekhi Becton just signed with the Chargers over the weekend. What holes do they have to fill through the draft? How did that first week of free agency potentially impact the Eagles draft plan? So we'll go through that mock draft, but we got to get into a signing. As I mentioned, right before I hit record, the Eagles brought in yet another pass rusher, and the Eagles brought in yet another former Georgia Bulldog first-round defensive player in former New York Giant edge rusher Azeez Ojulari. It's only a one-year deal worth $4 million, but I really like this signing. Azeez Ojulari is only 24 years old. So it continues with the theme that Howie's had this offseason of buy low, low-risk, high-reward signings of former top picks, a lot of talent that, I don't want to say fell out of favor with their team, but maybe they didn't meet the ceiling or the potential of their draft status, and now you bring them into Philadelphia, and maybe they can be that guy, or in a smaller role, maybe you can get more out of that player, and I think that's exactly what can happen with Ojulari. Is he going to be an every down player for the Eagles? No. But I think he could be a really good complement to Nolan Smith, Jalyx Hunt, and whoever the early pick is in the draft that you bring in on the edge. I don't think signing Ojulari or Joshua Uche last week is going to stop this team from investing in an edge rusher in a loaded draft class, because Uche and Ojulari are both only on one-year contracts. But I like having Ojulari as a pass rushing specialist, as like that fourth guy in the rotation, obvious third downs. That's where the Giants used him, and I thought he was a good player. 6 sacks in 2024. He's been on and off injured, so that's why he only had 2.5 sacks in 2023. But he's a consistent 5+ sack guy on limited snaps. He had 5.5 in 2022. He had 8 sacks his rookie year in 2021. He's explosive. He's undersized, so again, you don't want him in obvious running situations. You're not going to see him out there a lot on first and second down. But I like kind of doubling down on that pass rushing specialist. Like that was Joshua Uche last week, a former second-round pick that's had a double-digit sack season. You're not paying him much of anything on a prove-it one-year deal. You run it back, do the same thing this week with Ojulari. Between Ojulari and Uche, I'd imagine at least one of them can be what you hoped Bryce Huff would be, as that pass rush specialist, third or fourth guy in the rotation. Nolan Smith and Jalyx Hunt are your full-time players, and then you invest a long-term piece in the draft at this spot. But as I mentioned, his name, Bryce Huff, I will say this signing likely says Bryce Huff's time in Philadelphia is coming to an end. They can free up $4 million in cap space if they get rid of Bryce Huff with that post-June 1st designation. If they get rid of him before that, which I think is likely now at this point, because they're going to want to get probably any sort of draft compensation they can, even if it's a conditional day 3 selection. I think they're still going to do that and eat the around $5 million in dead cap that it would take to get him off the books. I continue to say on the show that I think Bryce Huff could be that player that we're describing in Ojulari and Uche as that third down guy, now that you're not asking him to be a full-time player. But I think the Eagles see that that's just probably not a good idea for Bryce Huff, who's probably going to want a change of scenery after being a healthy scratch in the Super Bowl. They probably saw that even though Howie Roseman clearly still believes that Bryce Huff could be something, and he said that during the Super Bowl week, at the same time, I think he knows his defensive coordinator, who he takes his word very seriously, and Vic Fangio. He probably knows Bryce Huff does not have the trust of Vic Fangio. So I think it's best for both parties likely to move on, even though I think Huff can still be that role player, that good role player he was with the New York Jets. But this is a cheaper way to do that. In Ojulari and Uche, I like just kind of doubling down on this, throwing at the wall, see if one of these former high pick sticks kind of move. And Ojulari is a better player than Uche. Last year was a healthy scratch in his own right in the Super Bowl, along with Bryce Huff. Ojulari, yeah, again, he is not an every down player. He's not a first round pick type of guy like the Giants envisioned, but 22 sacks over 4 years isn't that bad. And considering, again, he's been a role player on limited snaps, he's a very efficient pass rusher. So that was the kind of guy I wanted to bring in. I like the sack production. I wanted the Eagles to get deeper with the edge because of Brandon Graham. Now we know he's going to retire, which is sad to think about, but I think this also spells the end of BG's time in Philadelphia. With Josh Sweat gone as well and likely Bryce Huff, you were going to lose 3 guys that were a part of that rotation last year. I believe in Jalyx Hunt, but at the same time, you want to have some more options in case he doesn't take that next step. Ojulari can be that player. So I like what Howie Roseman did here, but I will say it's only a 1-year contract. Same with Uche. These guys are not every down players, full-time guys. I don't think this means much of anything for Nolan Smith or Jalyx Hunt status, and I do not think this means, okay, the Eagles are going to start focusing on other positions in the 2025 NFL draft. Like, no. They are going to draft a pass rusher. Maybe it's the edge. Maybe it's defensive tackle. It's going to be at least one early on in this draft, and I think they'll likely take at least one of each, a defensive end and a defensive tackle, before they hit all those picks in round 5. Like, I think both of those spots will likely be off the board by the end of round 4, regardless of what they do in free agency. But this is what Howie Roseman likes to do, is don't block any holes from being filled by a rookie. Like, don't completely lock up a starting job before you get to the draft, but have backup options in case young players aren't ready to go or they just don't pan out. Like, I like that strategy, and that's what Howie's been doing, and he is not really putting himself in a corner at all from a financial perspective with any of these contracts. They are all prove-it deals with little to no guarantees on 1 year, but they're not the Band-Aid signings of the past where it's an older veteran. It's a Bradley Fletcher type or a Malik Jackson. I know I always use Malik Jackson, but that kind of signing, Andrew Sendejo. It's not a Zach Brown, right, from 2019. These are younger players that could still be ascending, that have, like, their careers aren't said and done, that this is who they are. Like, it's a bunch of 24 and 26-year-olds, and I like that way of bargain bin shopping more than what Howie's done in the past with aging veterans that get hurt and their best days are behind them, whereas these guys, their best days could be ahead of them in an environment, in a team that gets the most out of these players. I said that last week with Mekhi Becton. These guys, look at Becton, look at Zach Bond. You could be that next player that was a role player or a backup on another team, and you come into this environment in Philadelphia that has great coaches and great players around you, and that normally gets the most out of talented players that were first and second round picks. So I really like this move, and it's a good signing for very little to no guaranteed money at a total of $4 million over 1 year. But like I said, the big moves are still going to come through the 2025 NFL draft. So let's get into our first mock draft post first wave of NFL free agency. Coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, it's Mock Draft Monday. This episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? I know I do. Between dining out and online shopping, those are my 2 bugaboos. Even entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building your wealth as well. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I'm budgeting a lot smarter and I'm saving a whole lot more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's Monarch Money at code LOCKEDONNFL for 50% off your first month. And guys, today's show is also sponsored by FanDuel. March Madness is here. FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year. FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. So visit FanDuel.com. Get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, Howie Roseman continues to go thrift shopping for young players that maybe didn't hit their ceiling with another team, but they have first, second round talent, and he is banking on his coaches, his strong roster. He's banking on those strong support systems getting the most out of these players. Today's experiment in that way was Azeez Ojulari, formerly of the New York Giants, and yet another Georgia Bulldog, so he'll fit right into that defense. 22 sacks over 4 years in New York, 8 in 2021, 5.5 in 2022. Battled injuries in 2023, so he only had 2.5 and then 6 last year in 2024. But Ojulari is a pass rushing specialist, not an every down player. He's only on a 1-year deal. Same with Joshua Uche. It likely says it's the end of Bryce Huff's time in Philly. Same with Brandon Graham, but not a rookie coming through the 2025 NFL draft. Spoiler, I will be taking defensive linemen in this draft. However, with my first pick, I did not take a lineman, and that's the first time this offseason that I have not taken a lineman with my first selection of our Monday mock drafts. So the Eagles have the 32nd overall pick. I could totally see them try to trade up for, let's say, an edge rusher like James Pierce if Tennessee falls, or Jalen Walker because nobody knows where to use him properly at the NFL level. Is he a stand-up linebacker? Is he an edge rusher? Like, how do we use him? Does that make him fall down the board a little bit? Is Walter Nolan there in the at that 24th spot? That's who I keep targeting with the Minnesota Vikings because they only have 4 picks this year. I could totally see the Eagles trading up. Heck, even for now that CGJ is gone, a Malachi Starks. Talk about just adding more Georgia players to that defense, a Swiss Army knife safety that has that kind of athleticism, coverage ability, tackling. Could totally see those trade-ups. However, Howie Roseman's also, you can see it again. He's starting to collect draft picks like he did after the Carson Wentz era, so he could be flexible. He could be aggressive, use those picks to go get a proven veteran star if they randomly hit the open market, like an A.J. Brown. Nobody expected that. Maybe in the future there's another player out there that the Eagles can grab in 2026 or beyond. Having draft picks can help you do that. Having those draft picks can help you trade up. If a guy like a Jalen Carter falls down the board, it can also help. It allows you to do everything. It allows you to have your cake and eat it too. You can be aggressive, spend, but because you've collected so many draft picks, you still have the quantity of the draft. You can still build your team through those inexpensive rookie deals. So I kind of like the idea of continuing to look for trade downs. And I could see that with this draft that's not super strong. I think the difference between the 15th overall pick and the 40th might not be that crazy of a drop-off. So trading down from 32 is an interesting idea, especially with the depth of this defensive line class. So I decided to trade down from the 32nd overall pick. I collected a second rounder in 2026 from the Miami Dolphins, and I fell down to their second round pick at 48th overall. And I took a safety, Penn State safety Kevin Winston Jr. I think this is an interesting idea after Chauncey Gardner-Johnson left. This might be the biggest hole now on the Eagles roster when it comes to like the immediate 2025. And I think Kevin Winston, if he did not get injured in 2024, you could make the argument he's the second best safety in this class, like maybe even over Nick Emenwari. Some were comparing him and Malachi Starks 2 years ago, saying this is 1A, 1B in that 25 class. But I do think because of Nick Emenwari's combine, because of Malachi Starks' success, that those two will likely be the first 2 safeties off the board. Kevin Winston Jr. could fall. And I think drafting for need, if it's not a reach, is a smart idea, especially when you're as expensive as the Eagles roster is, because it allows you to fill a hole with a long-term, cheap contract where you have 4 to 5 years of team control. And Kevin Winston is a playmaker. And the Eagles lost not just Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, but Darius Slay. They lost 2 legitimate playmakers in the secondary. Now, they still have Quinyon Mitchell. They still have Cooper DeJean. Zach Bond's a playmaker as well. So is Reed Blankenship, one of the best fourth-quarter safeties in the league when it comes to turning the ball over, getting interceptions for last year. But 7 interceptions just walked out the door with CGJ and Darius Slay. And I think you need another playmaker in that secondary. I like Sidney Brown, but I don't know how much Vic Fangio likes Sidney Brown, and I think they could do better. Kevin Winston Jr. is a really interesting player. Like, he's got the range of Sidney Brown. He has that speed. He's got much better coverage ability, in my opinion. Really long arms. He's a good tackler, and he is that playmaker. Like, he has a nose for turnovers, interceptions. You can play him as a, cover 2 deep safety. You can play him as, in the box. He flies downhill. Kevin Winston, if he falls in the second round, I don't think he's worth the 32nd overall pick, but I could totally see the Eagles going for somebody like Winston with that first pick in the second round. And since we traded down here from 32nd, that first pick in the second round of the 2 that we have, that's going to end up being the first pick. So I think, again, they have the flexibility. This team doesn't have any immediate, legitimate needs. Even at safety right now, Reed Blankenship and Sidney Brown will likely be a fine duo. But I do think, so they don't have to force a need, but if the difference, this is what I've always said, if you have 2 needs, and there's other things that go into play, it's not always just best player available versus need. It's also positional value. It's also the depth of the class. You might be able to afford to wait on an edge rusher here because it's such a deep class. It might not be a huge drop-off from your second round pick or your third rounder. However, if there is a bigger need at an important spot, and let's say that player is only a spot or 2 below another player on your rankings, but it's a bigger need, I don't think it's a bad idea sometimes to draft that player. You know what I mean? Unless it's a huge reach where you're taking a player that's 10, 15 spots below another prospect because it is filling an immediate need, that's a bad use of resources. But if it's close, the Eagles needed Quinyon Mitchell last year, and they drafted for need, and it worked. Same with Cooper DeJean. They needed Jalen Carter. They needed Nolan Smith, and it worked. It doesn't always have to be an immediate need, but future need, immediate need. Let's see how many times I can say the word need. That's what the NFL always does, and I'm so sick of hearing that NFL teams don't do that, and it's not the right way to go about things. Nobody just drafts best player available in a vacuum, regardless of what you have on your roster. That would be, to me, as irresponsible as forcing a need pick. So I like Kevin Winston a lot. The prospect, I think it's a steal here at 48th overall. Trade down, collect another second round pick next year. You have 2 seconds next year, a first, 2 thirds at this point. You'll have so much flexibility to do pretty much whatever you want. So I think Winston can be that guy that fills the void of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Have another second round pick, though, the Eagles' own pick at 64 overall. And I went with another immediate need. I think Dallas Goedert is likely gone. Even if he's not, I think this would be a steal at 64. I don't know if he'll be available. This would even be just best player available at this point. But LSU tight end Mason Taylor was on the board, and I had to take him. I like the idea of following that 2018 blueprint again. Dallas Goedert's 30. Even if he's back in 2024 or 2025, I don't see a scenario where the Eagles do sign him to a long-term contract. I think just hearing all the reports, seeing them sign 2 young tight ends last week, seeing this deep tight end class, I think the writing's on the wall. So drafting a Mason Taylor makes perfect sense. I think he'd be a steal here. It's good value. This guy's a fluid athlete, a really good route runner, soft hands. Is he the run after the catch weapon, a deep threat? That is Dallas Goedert? No. But he's a solid player. And I think he's a very good receiving tight end. I think he's the 3rd best tight end in this class. And even if Goddard's back for a year, like I said, this is a long-term need that you got to fill. The Eagles are going to pass more next year. I think you're going to want a pass-friendly 12 personnel package. I think you could upgrade over Grant Calcaterra. I think Mason Taylor would make a lot of sense, and I like the idea of Howie Roseman continuing to kind of go against his traditional draft ways of going heavy with the trenches, the offensive line, the defensive line. Last year, he takes 2 corners with his first 2 picks. How about this year? He goes safety, and he goes tight end. Those are important pieces of this team. Dallas Goedert and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson were 2 of the biggest contributors of the Super Bowl win in the playoffs. They were 2 really good players for you, and so I tried to fill those needs since they really did in free agency with this mock draft. So those are my first 2 picks in the second round at pick 48. Kevin Winston Jr., the Penn State safety, and then with the 64th overall pick, LSU tight end Mason Taylor. We'll go through rounds 3 through 7 as we wrap up Mock Draft Monday. Coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
All right, guys, we're wrapping up Mock Draft Monday right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, going through a post-free agency, at least week one of free agency mock draft, after all the departures from the Eagles and their UFA pool, after the signings of, A.J. Dillon, trading for Kenyon Green, bringing in Joshua Uche. Now we know Azeez Ojulari, Adoree Jackson. Do those players impact the Eagles' draft plans at all? Trading CGJ away. I think that one definitely does. Yes, the Eagles might not want to pay a safety a long-term contract like Chauncey because they have to pay so many other players and soon even their corners. We saw Derek Stingley today get $30 million a year. Everyone's getting huge deals this year. At the same time, I don't think they devalue the safety position, especially in Vic Fangio's defense. I think they saw the impact bringing Chauncey back had last year, having that kind of playmaker at this position, having a Reed Blankenship. I think Reed is not the best coverage safety, and neither is Sidney Brown. So having that kind of coverage safety is important, and I think that's why drafting somebody like Kevin Winston Jr. of Penn State would make a lot of sense. And I do think as well, Dallas Goedert's likely gone. So if a Mason Taylor were to fall to you in the second round, I love that pick. I feel like he's kind of a combo of Zach Ertz and Goddard, where he's got a lot of the same strengths as those players. Is he the route runner of Zach Ertz? No. Is he the run after the catch weapon of Goddard? No. But he can do everything really well. He's just a smooth player. And I think as a good compliment to A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, to be that third or fourth guy, or fourth or fifth guy with Saquon as well, next to Jahan Dotson, I think that makes a lot of sense, even if Dallas Goedert is back for one more year. So those are my first two picks. We traded down. We collected a 2026 second rounder, trading down with Miami from 32 to 48. In round 3, I took a player that's really interesting. So the Eagles have done a really good job of replacing stars, like legendary stars. They replaced Jason Kelce with Cam Jurgens, a very similar type of player. They replaced Darius Slay with Quinyon Mitchell, a very similar type of player. It worked both times. They replaced Fletcher Cox with Jalen Carter. The Eagles have such a good track record of replacing legends, even in prior years, replacing Jason Peters with Jordan Mailata. It's unbelievable, honestly, how good they are at doing this. A lot of teams don't recover from losing these kind of legends instantly, and the Eagles do. What if now that we know Brandon Graham, especially after bringing in Ojulari and Uche, that tells us BG is going to retire, at least in my opinion. Why not try to get BG 2.0? There is a guy that reminds me of Brandon Graham so much, and he actually says he emulates his game after BG. Central Arkansas edge rusher David Walker. This could be BG 2.0. Like when you watch him on tape from his Senior Bowl one-on-ones in the game, his film from Central Arkansas, he looks like Brandon Graham. Like that insane competitiveness, that elite motor. He's not the longest edge rusher in the world. Definitely has to work on his technique and developing more pass rushing moves, especially a counter if he doesn't get that initial first win. But man, he runs like BG, and he rushes from the inside a lot as well, like Brandon Graham does. This is a player I could totally see the Eagles being enamored with, saying like, this is our new version of him. Like this strategy has worked for Philadelphia over the years. And if he falls to the third round, I could totally see the Eagles maybe even trading up for David Walker. He's an elite RAS guy, raw athletic score, which the Eagles really prioritize in the draft now. He's explosive. He wins with power and speed, really good bend. And like I said, when you got a guy that's this competitive, that has this kind of motor, that goes sideline to sideline. I watched a play on his tape earlier today where he chased a running back 40 yards down the field off an explosive play, and he ran all the way across the field to go get him and save a touchdown. Like, that's the kind of player David Walker is. And sometimes you might be concerned about a player coming from the FCS, but I always say if you're from the FCS, you got to be historically good, right, to stand out and for me to believe that you could be an NFL guy. He was historically good in the FCS. And then when he went to the Senior Bowl, he was one of the best pass rushers against college's best of the best. So David Walker, I think, would make a ton of sense for the Eagles. He's a high floor player, good against the run. You added a pass rushing specialist like Ojulari, like Uche. Those could be your obvious third down rotating players. But if you want another guy to rotate through in first and second down, a more long-term piece on the edge with Nolan Smith and with Jalyx Hunt, I really like Central Arkansas edge rusher David Walker. I think in that round 3 range, maybe the end of round 2, that's where you'll start to see his name get tossed around. If he's there at pick 96, I think that makes all the sense in the world. And then I'm really happy with what you have in the edge. You've got Smith, you've got Hunt, you'd have Walker at that point, and then either Ojulari or Uche. Maybe you keep both, and those two have a similar snap count as your 4A, 4B in that edge rotation. Also, you brought back Patrick Johnson last week. Suddenly, that group, is it as proven as it's been in years past? No, but there's a ton of upside in that group, and it's very young. And I think that's a really exciting idea. So Walker, even with the move bringing in Ojulari today, that's still a pick that I like a lot. And then here's one too. Round 4, I had to get my guy. This was my first guy of the 2025 draft class. Ole Miss defensive tackle, J.J. Pagias. He is such a fun player. He's a defensive tackle that's a little undersized, but he's explosive, a pass rushing specialist. He can be in that rotation with Moro Ijoma and Jordan Davis next to Jalen Carter. But also, for our YouTube viewers, if you notice, and for our listeners, the picture I put up of Pagias, he's carrying the football and he's being tackled. He's a defensive tackle, but Ole Miss ran a Wildcat package, and he's been doing this since high school as a former running back, where they almost have like a Wildcat package for their defensive tackle. Like, Pagias is somebody that can run the football, and what a fun new idea. Like, we're talking about new ways the Eagles can zig when the rest of the league zags. How can you add new wrinkles to this offense and be creative? Even in the run game, like, how do you add on to already one of the, I think, the best run game in NFL history? Why not add a special defensive tackle package? Oh, by the way, the tush push, you want to use somebody that's not Jalen Hurts? Maybe use a defensive tackle. Or if they ban the tush push ever, here's the Eagles' antidote to it. You ban the tush push, we're going to draft a defensive tackle that knows how to play running back to ram it up the middle. Good luck. I would love that. Pagias is one of my favorite players in this class. He's a fun study, and he's a good defensive tackle. Like, he's a fun pass rusher. He's got a good pass rush bag when it comes to moves. I think the Eagles would be interested in him. He's an athletic player, and I think you add him and David Walker to this defensive line, and I'm really excited about what Vic Fangio can work with, and it's so inexpensive. Round 5, a ton of picks here. I doubled down. I don't know if I would make this pick after the Ojulari signing, but I think doubling down on the edge, adding more depth would make a lot of sense. Jay Joyner of Minnesota would make a lot of sense. The Eagles did meet with him during the combine in Indianapolis. Lengthy player. He's more like a Josh Sweat, hand in the dirt type of edge rusher. I think, again, Ojulari and who am I thinking of? Joshua Uche. Sorry. Uche, they're on 1-year deals, so that shouldn't stop you from doing anything in this draft. Doubling down and taking another edge rusher in a loaded class, Jay Joyner, I like it, and that's my kind of player. Lengthy, tall, powerful, hand in the dirt type of edge. The Eagles are a little bit undersized with edge rushers when you look at Nolan Smith, Jalyx Hunt, Uche, and Ojulari. There's not really an obvious first and second down replacement for Josh Sweat. Jay Joyner could be that guy from Minnesota. So even though you have now, with that David Walker selection, you've got 5 guys that are competing, adding that 6th guy in Jay Joyner, I don't hate it at all. Because if you want to cut Uche or Ojulari because one of these or both rookies pan out, you're not on the books for anything. Those are 1-year prove-it deals with like no guaranteed money. So I made that selection before the breaking news of Ojulari signing, but I still like that one, and I think the Eagles would be interested in Joyner for sure. A couple more picks here to wrap up Mock Draft Monday. Round 5, pick 164. I took a former quarterback turned slot technician from San Jose State, Nick Nash, to compete with Johnny Wilson. The Eagles need more wide receiver depth behind Brown, Smith, and Dotson. All they have right now is Johnny Wilson. Britton Covey, again, they did not pick up the RFA tender, so he's a UFA. They could bring him back, but I think the Eagles need some more receivers, and I like having a potential like slot technician, a good route runner, a possession-like player, and Nick Nash can kind of be your version of what the Commanders saw in Luke McCaffrey last year, a former quarterback turned slot receiver, smart player, knows how to get open, good hands. I like that idea in Nick Nash. Then my final 2 picks, got some depth on the offensive line. Jacksonville State, right guard Clay Webb. Mekhi Becton gone now. You have Tyler Steen. You've got Kenyon Green. You've got Trevor Keegan as well. But adding more depth on the offensive line, a versatile center type / guard in Clay Webb, who's a good athlete, can get to the 2nd and 3rd level. I like that in round 5. And then one final pick, Oregon State, or just Oregon, slot corner, Jabbar Muhammad. The Eagles could use some more slot depth. That's what Muhammad is. Avonte Maddox likely gone this year, bringing some more depth at corner with Darius Slay gone. Who knows what you're getting in Adoree Jackson. Adding another corner in this draft would make a lot of sense, and I wouldn't even be surprised if it was earlier than round 5. So there you go. There's my first mock draft after the first wave of NFL free agency. Let me know what you think. What would you do different? What moves did you like? Hit me up on X at DiBiase, LOE, and at Locked On Birds, and let us know what you think on our YouTube community page. But that's going to do it for today's show. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Louie DiBiase signing off. As always, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.